Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome to Fuqua LinkedIn Live. My name is Saša Pekeč. I'm a professor at Decision Sciences area at Fuqua School of Business. And today I'm going to talk about the impact of AI on managerial decision making. So I'm a member of Decision Sciences area. So for those of you who don't know or know, the Fuqua has 8 academic areas. And decision sciences area is basically analytics central of our business school in terms of intellectual assets. And so we teach decision making across our programs, degree and non-degree programs, and how one teaches decision making changes with the needs of the society and business. And we have seen lots of change in recent years, even during my tenure here at Fuqua. So to start with the topics that we are covering, so I will focus on first on opportunities. Like first thing is like, what is AI? Everybody seems to have their own definition of AI. Sometimes people want to. It's a buzzword, right? So it might be clearer to kind of set up first the language. So AI is something which is a concept that is 70 years old at this point, and basically it refers to using computing to allow machines to perform tasks that require human intelligence. So in a way, like, can machine do something that humans would need to do? So like it is sort of using machines to perform tasks that we somehow can do. And the critical part of like thinking of using machines, how do you use machines to perform tasks that require human intelligence? When you think about in the context of AI or even AI-assisted physical movements that humans can do, it is basically data. The key of deployment of any AI or any algorithm or anything that we can do is data. So rapid evolution of AI or any other data-driven enhancements of human activity is directly related with the transformative innovation cycle due to digital technological revolution. So that's why I'm mentioning this Schumpeter's wave. So those of you who know, is like the whole, you can think about evolutions of societies and human activity through different waves of different big-time innovations that fundamentally transform how societies and businesses work. And many people think, and we live in the midst of a digital revolution. And AI is just a manifestation of part of that digital revolution. So what we really need is data-rich settings, but not only that one needs to obtain data, store it, and process it. Sometimes this data is very unstructured, right? So, and that kind of also points out to early uses of AI and how they actually impacted business. So when you think about things like finance industry, right? So finance industry is data-driven forever. So like they were kind of like forefront of making quick decisions based on computer algorithmic analysis of data or support of some of these, let's say, trading decision based on some kind of analytics processing. So early uses of AI or like any kind of data-driven decision making is in fact in data-rich settings with structured, organized data. So that's one good example. What really changed and made the current state of affairs possible is is basically internet, like bringing democratization of widely held data across the globe, let's say, and advances in data collection and processing power. So like basically entering internet and making internet available to society, to end users without any specific technological knowledge, allow this outburst of availability of data and ability to process this data. However, some of that data was very unstructured. And that opened the floodgates of different uses of data, of data analysis, and the different methods which computer scientists developed and engineering people developed through decades of using AI to make better decisions. So from predictive AI, so I think that's like the most typical thing that is like out with us in society for some time right now. And I think like there is a consensus that machines at this point, given the computational power, communicational power, and the abundance of data, machines are better than humans in performing very narrowly defined optimization tasks. And I think that's the case of society or managerial decision making for at least quarter of a century. Right? For example, which customer should be given a credit line? Which customer will be offered a discount in some kind of a setting? Which ad should be displayed to a particular user who requests the content? Right? So like when you request a content on your browsing device, and like content is loading in that millisecond, somebody inserts the ad that is targeted for you. Right? So no human can do that, but the machine can be very good at it. Right. So then there is a next level that we are observing now also for some time, and that is sensing and detection. From algorithmic filtering that like every one of your email accounts has, to fraud detection, for computer vision, like one of the most clear applications of deep learning, like recognizing objects, right? So to self-driving cars that, like while they are not yet here, the technology is here. They are not. There's no widespread business use of them yet. There are some business uses, but it's not widespread. But they're here. So this is all allowed with exponential growth in amounts of data being processed, and then also the ability to make quick decisions on multiple layers. So and then the one that general public saw the most of in last year, and everybody is all it's all the rage about, is generative AI. So not only using AI in the sense of this deep learning and predictive AI, but also to generate content, so it brings AI to the masses, right? So it's I would argue that change is somewhat similar to those of us who are old enough to remember how Google search completely disrupted how people use or utilize or leverage information available on the internet, right? So it's in a way, the abilities are really just tapping what are the possible use cases of that. Similarly, when Google search started, like how did you, it just helped reach out to relevant information, but you needed to ask the right questions. Similarly with generative AI, if you use ChatGPT or something else, or like you use AI anyway in many of your daily interactions with digital content anyway, the question is, how do you ask the right questions? So there is a lot of unstructured content here, and so this is it allows. So it's basically what generative AI and also natural language processing, also before large language models, allows this that you don't just need to deal with just data-rich settings and anymore, and that you need to only focus on applications which are kind of like very specified, very specific to kind of like data-rich context. So like now, widespread applications of personalized marketing, supply chain logistics management, even better fraud detection, administrative back office document generation tasks. For example, when you think about generative AI, is like generating documents in like any kind of like a legal setting, compliance setting. This is just like the great gift. Or like setting up your schedule, right? Like communicating at a high level, right? So there are lots of these applications. I think like the one that might have been the most interesting one to my personal liking, and I'm going to of course impose some of that in what I'm presenting, is HR, right? So HR is a very interesting example of applications of how AI really applications changed fundamentally how HR function works. So it is basically a low-hanging fruit because there is a lot of unstructured data and lots of room for improvement given this unstructured data, because hiring the best candidate, sometimes success rate is closer to 50% than 100%. Unlike, say, trading in financial markets, the decisions are very nearly to be optimized, right? So therefore, like, you can make significant improvements in efficiency by just improving a little bit of your quality of your decisions, even with not very structured data. So and so applications of machine learning using the data in sourcing and talent management are just so prevalent in the last decade that it's basically now part of I think like every bigger corporation has like basically software systems running in behind using AI. Also, like in general, in any other aspects of large businesses, basically, even if you think you're not using AI, if you work in a large company, you clearly use AI a lot because AI is embedded in different ERP products such as Salesforce, AWS, SAP, whatever you name it. So business benefits from digital revolution, even though you might not think you're using it. So embracing it and understanding that it can percolate even at the micro level is the only way to stay competitive, right? So this is like the revolution that is changing the way how we do business, and that's what I'm trying to talk about here after this longish introduction. If everyone uses, so for example, if you think about the electricity revolution that industrial revolution that electricity brought, it's like if everyone uses electricity, one will be disadvantaged if you're not using it. So if everybody else gets benefits from digital revolution, for example, AI support in HR or back office or in marketing, there is a huge opportunity cost for your organization in bypassing it. So you need to know what's available and how can you actually do it, right? So there are obviously serious barriers to entry. So data, right? It's less so of a barrier with everything digitized, but it could be a barrier to entry, and also how to process data. And you need to have a specific knowledge how to communicate with those who are experts in analyzing data or who are experts in deploying, let's say, AI systems, which is a general problem in managerial decision making. If you think about from the perspective today or like your parents' way of managing, right? So when you think about top companies in the world today, if managers' job is to kind of like manage people and processes, and what are the core production workers when you think about top companies of today? The key skill is like basically software engineers are fundamental production workers. So you need to communicate with software engineers, and being able to speak their language and understand what can and cannot be done by using data approaches to decision making is a critical skill that somebody needs to be able to empower themselves if you want to succeed in the new world where digital revolution is changing everything for everybody in every single aspect of any industry. And I know I sound very general, but I think that's the world we live in. So, and this is why generative AI, one example for generative AI is such a game changer. So when ChatGPT came out, bursted out, and everybody saying, "Oh my God, it's like we were all gonna be replaced by machines because you can write a beautiful document easily." But when you think about where is the biggest improvement, there is, in fact, when you think about coding, right? So because like mundane pieces of a code, it's very easy to generate that if you ask ChatGPT the right question. So it is kind of like, again, akin to using Google search to find information, but here on steroids because way more powerful. You just like ask, "Oh, can you give me a code to solve this particular problem?" So you really need to just know what to ask. What are you trying to do? So you need to ask the right question. So basically, rise of generative AI is allowing masses to bypass technical lingo and expertise and make utilizing AI accessible to all. So I would say that like if one professional class that has most to worry about of generative AI is actually coders, it's software engineers. So in a way, what happens with rise of generative AI, the hottest programming language becomes English, which allows managers, if they need to manage people who actually have like this technical expertise of understanding how to use data to kind of help me make my decisions, and I have this barrier to entry because I don't know how to explain, I don't know exactly what I do, suddenly you might be leveling the playing field, because the question becomes of that one of creativity, which question you're asking, and not necessarily what are you, do you know how to code, right? So, so while there are beautiful opportunities, one cannot be carried away. Like with any kind of new shiny object, you don't want to overemphasize what this can actually produce for you. So you need to think about using any new technology, including AI, as decision support system, what is kind of called in lingo. You use it to kind of support, guide you, help you in your decision making, not to replace your brain. So utilizing some new technology just for sake of utilizing it, or just because others are doing it, is often a recipe for a disaster. So it is also important not to just embrace the new and like empower yourself, but to understand the limitations, blind spots, and pitfalls. So I'm going to just mention a few of those that like we are all aware of, and they are kind of like very typical of what's going on, right? So first of all, when you think about, and I think it's very, very clear with ChatGPT, these general applications like large language models, which are kind of like generic applications. They're not designed to help specific tasks, but they are just like general use tools, is that they provide you an answer. They're eager to please. So while the vast amount of data that is being processed to come to a recommendation that AI is giving you is not, it's coming with an answer. It's coming with a binary answer. And so the answer doesn't come, it's like, look, I'm only 55% confident in what I'm saying, or I'm like 100% confident in what I'm saying. So it doesn't come with a nuance of difficulty of the solution that you're presenting. So taking that into account is really important, because when you think about how ChatGPTs of the world work, right, like the generative AI tools work, it's basically, it helps us sift through large amounts of data, increase complexity of decision making, like due to interconnectivity of data, interrelatedness, abundance of information. There's so many more different actions and outcomes that one needs to consider, and it also amplifies possibility of these extreme outcomes to emerge, because like the solution might be a nuanced solution, but it's presented as like binary solution, right? And one needs to be really cognizant of that, right? It's like when something gives you, it's like similar to Google search, right? You go do a Google search and you see a top link. Is this really 100% the best link that you were looking for? So it's kind of like the same idea. The second thing that one needs to think about is that given that like data-driven models, like AI-based models are all inherently data-driven, they're driven based on the data that they have access to. So, and of course, there are like issues with the data access, but there is also one other thing which is really important, is like AI or any data-driven solutions are actually backward-looking, right? That they don't see what is coming up in the future, so they cannot see the future, right? So they kind of want to provide a solution, and they kind of propagate the solution which is based on majority view of the crowds, and it's very hard to see the future, very hard to see nuance in a way, right? So for example, you can think about go 5 years back in time, in May, let's say May 2019, and think about that you have the tools of AI today. Which AI tool would forecast the future? What is the chance that the global pandemic would occur within a year from May 2019? And how would that impact be impacting global economy and humanity. So simply in the past data, we had a pandemic like 100 years ago, but you can see how it's very hard to see that. So like basically AI by default has a blind spot when it comes to adaptability to unknowns, to paraphrase Don Rumsfeld. And like, thinking about that is like, we also have always a lot to learn about from military leaders, because all they focus about is risk. And so like AI has this blind spot on unknowns. So I wanted to point to that out. And then obviously the final one is the one of the algorithmic bias that is a critical issue. It was way more, it's like lots of people work on the issue of algorithmic bias, and there are corrections, but it's a serious problem. Just again, it's inherent how data-driven methods work, right? So basically how data-driven methods work, they work based on, so like every piece of data is a piece of evidence, right? So, and like if you have abundance of evidence, you on some kind of similar pattern, you become more sure that similar pattern is going to repeat. If you don't have much evidence in some particular subspace of your decision space, then whatever the data analysis provides, you'll have less certainty about it. So you're going to have like what technically is called confidence intervals. You're going to have a larger confidence when you have more information. You're going to have less confidence when you have less information. And that feeds basically essentially whatever is the minority pieces of info, you're going to have less confidence in making decisions. And so if you're guiding your AI system to be resilient to bad outcomes, you don't want to risk bad decisions. Therefore, you will be going maybe for decisions for which you have like more evidence that you're not going to make a mistake, thereby feeding back the feedback loop of having yet one more data point from the majority opinion just because you were uncertain about something which is minor. This is like a very typical inherent basically data analytic bias of the algorithmic bias. And then there is obviously human garbage in, garbage out bias that we can discuss at some later time. And then finally, I want to point out, so like what I'm pointing out in these things is like very important issue that I think should give us some kind of a console us a little bit, that everything how we think about problems, that doesn't change. How do we think about issues, how we manage? The critical thinking is even more essential now when AI is deployed. So you cannot replace your brain by AI and run data-driven decisions. You need to understand why you're doing what you're doing. You need to understand these blind spots. And for that, you need the critical thinking. And the first thing I mentioned is also important here, that AI is eager to please. It doesn't tell you, it's actually AI-driven decisions are hardest and most prone to errors exactly when they're nuanced. When they are like expert, the prevailing mass opinion might be wisdom of the crowd, might be pointing to something, but there is a nuance. And then it's like, if you go against the crowd, like it's exactly like the leadership thing, you understand that there is a nuance and there might be some other decision lurking. But for that, you need critical thinking. And if you bypass that, you are up for trouble. You deploying AI, and then AI. And I think I'm gonna try to kind of like do this maybe in the Q&A because I think I'm talking for way too much. Is the issue of accountability? Unleashing AI brings a bunch of accountability issues. I talked about the clarity of purpose a little bit. It's like, if you can empower yourself, and you should empower yourself by using data-driven methods, don't forget about the why. So like questions of why are you using AI? Just because you can, or there is something to be gained? Is there a value? Because like you need to judge, it's like, is this investment of resources worth the better decision making or better quality decisions you're getting? Because if there is no cost benefit, you should not necessarily do it. And also there is an issue of interpretability of actions. If these kind of data driven systems tell you something, do you want to do you want to understand why they are providing you this recommendation? I can give like one little example on that. So the medical decision making. So suppose that AI, you come to your annual physical, and your doctor tells you, look, you need to go to brain surgery right now in the next 2 hours. And you say, why? And it's like, well, AI says, that that's the best course of action. Would you do it? Right? It's like you need some kind of why, right? It's like, why is this? Why we came to this conclusion, right? Because like there might be a mistake. You need to understand interpretability. So like interpretability is a very important part of deploying it, and it's like the good data-driven decision systems would allow also, in addition to recommendation, helping user or manager understand why that interpretation, because that enhances our logic, our understanding of common sense and business situation. And finally, there is an issue of this ownership of unintended consequences that we are all aware of. There are like different legislations around the world. My quick thing, and I'm gonna point it out to open it up to questions, is that we as managers, as organizations, as individuals, should not hope that governments are regulate this. Because data knows no borders, so no government regulation is going to resort it. And we see that like the level of different regulations, let's say from China, which complete government oversight, from Europe, which is looking at for some principles around citizens, to US, where there is like really kind of like wild west of lack of regulation, and everybody running out of their responsibility where they should or not regulate. So we are on our own there. And so I would close with saying that like with great power that this gives, it's great responsibility on all of us deploying this. And I can talk a little bit more in questions. So I would be happy to open it up to any questions. And I know that some people already did it in the chat, and I forgot to tell you that you could ask questions in the chat, but I think everybody hopefully figured it out. So before I go to the questions, I just want to thank you for your attention, and also want to point out that it happens to be in, I think, 2 weeks from now. If you want to learn more about it or get your hands dirty in what is possible and how actually data-driven methods and these AI deployments can maybe enhance your managerial decision-making powers, Fuqua Executive Education is offering a 3-day non-degree program, which is called Data-Driven Decision-Making. So if you're interested, I'm sure you can find it at Fuqua pages, or maybe somebody can put it in the LinkedIn comments. Can point the link to that program. And with that, let me go to the questions in the Q&A. So I see a question here. I like the following definition of intelligence by psychologist Howard Gardner. Intelligence is the ability to solve problems or create products that are value with one or more cultural settings. I think about A as being machine intelligence. Yeah, I think I like that definition. It's and the question is, and I think like the interesting thing here is create products. And let me just comment on this briefly here. So maybe people think that, in fact, it's like, I think there is a nice distinction here between words generate and create, right? So what generative AI misses, it can generate content, but it is really not creating it. It's just like assembling it, content, generating it from different other sources. So in that sense, maybe there are interesting ways that one could not think of how to combine different sources, but is that creativity, right? So it can help us, our creative process, but I think like we as humans still, this part of creativity is a critical distinction. For how long? I don't know. Anyway, so this is just a side comment of this comment. So another one. So I'm just seeing what I'm getting here in my feed. In order to understand the data and AI language better, do I need to take any technical courses on AI? If yes, which of these courses suitable for managers? So I think depends on your definition of being technical, and it depends on your role in organization. So I just mentioned a second ago that we offer some of these non-degree courses exactly for managers which don't need to have any technical knowledge, except like what I mean is non-technical knowledge is I believe that everybody is facing data in their problems. So like you should have like at least basic understanding how the spreadsheet works, and like, oh, there is a data in spreadsheet and I can analyze data in a spreadsheet. So that might have been a technical burden for people who were like managers in their mid-career in 1995, let's say, when Excel would come out, and then it's, oh, now I need to deal with Excel. Now that's kind of like a fact of life, right? So maybe in 1985, it was the question, how do I write a bank check, right? So like you need to know how to deposit a check or something, right? So it's different. It's a level of basic literacy. And that's, I think, like ChatGPTs of the world are changing the game here, because like now you can you can communicate your thoughts in plain English, right? It's like figuring out, but asking the right question, that is what's important. It's like understanding how to structure what your question is, what your decision is, and understanding the nuances of the decision. Then you can ask the right questions, and you don't need to have a technical knowledge. So I would say, do you need technical courses? Not really, if you're not directly in charge of like technical workforce, very technical workforce. But where you should have a proficiency of not being afraid how to interact with some of these tools that are existing, that are made for general audiences, I say absolutely yes. And that's what we do in the business school. That's what we do with our degree programs. We prepare our students exactly to be able to use these new tools. And that's how education is changing. So if you had your formal managerial education like a couple of decades ago, or even a decade ago, I think it's never late to invest in yourself and enjoy and involve in with times and engage in lifelong learning. Right. Okay. So can I share some intuition around how the role of general LLMs and task-specific bots will evolve over the coming few years? Do you see bot developing and tuning becoming more intuitive for the non-technical practitioner? Yeah, it's like my guess is as good as yours. But I think the answer is yes. I think everything is going to be more. I think it's going to be a two-way street. So obviously, tools are going to become more intuitive for non-technical practitioners, but practitioners, out of the necessity, are going to have to also adopt new technology. So you can think about the similar thing here. Just a side thought here. When I don't know, SAP is like enterprise resource planning software, which is like one of the biggest players in the world. Many companies. There are many consultancies who live out of implementing SAP, and it's typically, it says that like, yeah, I mean, SAP gives you lots of benefits, but the whole organizations, and we are talking about tens of thousands of employees, need to adjust their own way of doing business to SAP. So like in a way, it's like a two-way street. Like you need to kind of like maybe adjust your old ways of doing stuff to kind of unlock the full potential. Obviously, there are lots of growing pains, and with these general purpose LLMs, obviously they fail exactly as I mentioned. They fail most when the tasks are specific. More specific, more nuanced task is, more likely they'll fail, but they're learning fast. And if you feed them, especially if you have like LLM based method within the companies, like company specific. So like, for example, OpenAI sells their technology also to companies themselves to kind of like help maybe exactly with interacting with customers. So then this is one example how then this system learns from your own data and improves as the growing pace grow. You learn how to improve your questions and your decision tasks for them, and they learn from more and more data, right? So that's the whole point of deep learning, that you kind of learn from your own mistakes. So I think, like, I overstayed my welcome for 5 minutes. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you for your participation, and follow us on LinkedIn Live event at Fuqua, and there's going to be one next month. Thank you.